But why are some parents so evil? Why? Picture this. You're scrolling through your phone on a quiet Tuesday morning when you see a headline that makes your blood run cold. A 6-year-old child, a father, a piece of exercise equipment, and a story so disturbing that it would shake an entire nation to its core. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. This isn't a movie script or a nightmare someone imagined. This is the real story of little Corey Micciolo, a boy who should have been learning to ride bikes, playing with friends, and dreaming about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Instead, his short life became a living nightmare at the hands of the one person who was supposed to protect him above all others. But here's what will haunt you the most. This tragedy could have been prevented. There were warning signs. There were people who tried to help. There were systems in place that should have saved this innocent child. So why didn't they work? If you think you can handle the truth about what really happened behind closed doors in New Jersey in 2021, then stay with me. Because once you hear Corey's story, you'll never forget it. And maybe, just maybe, we can make sure something like this never happens again. Before we begin, I need to ask you something important. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe that giving a voice to victims like Corey is important, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Because channels that cover these difficult but necessary stories need your support to keep going. Don't wait until the end of the video. Do it now, while you're thinking about it. Let me tell you about Corey Micciolo. He was 6 years old, the same age when most kids are losing their first tooth and getting excited about starting first grade. Corey had bright eyes and a smile that could light up any room he walked into. He loved playing, laughing, and doing all the things that 6-year-olds do. But Corey's life was complicated in ways that no child should ever have to experience. His parents, Christopher Greger and Brianna Micciolo, were no longer together. Like many children from separated families, Corey found himself caught in the middle of adult problems that were far too big for his small shoulders to carry. His mother, Brianna, fought hard for her son. She saw things that worried her. She noticed changes in Corey after he spent time with his father. But here's the thing about family court battles. They're messy, they're emotional, and sometimes the very system designed to protect children becomes the thing that puts them in harm's way. Can you imagine being 6 years old and not understanding why the adults in your life are always angry? Not knowing why you have to go back and forth between two homes that feel so different? Not having the words to explain that something doesn't feel right? Corey was just a little boy trying to make sense of a world that had already become too complicated for him. He deserved to feel safe. He deserved to feel loved. He deserved to have his childhood protected. But on March 20th, 2021, something happened that would change everything. Something that was caught on camera. Something so disturbing that when a jury would later see this footage, grown adults would break down in tears. What happened that day? And why didn't anyone stop it from happening again? I want you to think about the 6-year-olds in your life. Maybe it's your own child, your niece or nephew, a neighbor's kid, or a student you teach. Think about how small they are, how innocent, how much they trust the adults around them to keep them safe. Now imagine that trust being broken in the worst possible way. If you're watching this video because you care about child safety, because you want to understand how these tragedies happen so we can prevent them, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell too, because every time we share these stories, we honor the memory of children like Corey. We make sure their voices are heard. We make sure they're not forgotten. Something was wrong. Brianna Micciolo knew it in her gut the way only a mother can know. When Corey came back from visits with his father, he was different, quieter, more withdrawn. Sometimes he had unexplained injuries, bruises that didn't make sense for a normal, active 6-year-old. But here's the cruel reality of custody battles. When one parent raises concerns about the other, it often gets dismissed as drama or manipulation. The system that's supposed to protect children sometimes becomes the very thing that puts them in more danger. Brianna tried to document everything. She took pictures of bruises. She asked questions. She fought in court. But family court is complicated, and proving that something terrible is happening behind closed doors is harder than you might think. Meanwhile, Christopher Greger presented himself as a concerned father. To the outside world, He seemed like a dad who just wanted to spend time with his son. He had his own apartment. He had a job. He appeared stable and responsible. But appearances can be deadly deceptive. What was really happening during those visits? What was 6-year-old Corey experiencing that he couldn't put into words? And why do we as a society make it so hard for children to be believed when they're in danger? On March 20th, 2021, Christopher Greger took his son to the gym. Now, you might think, what's wrong with a father wanting to exercise with his child? Maybe he was trying to have some bonding time, get some physical activity, teach his son about being healthy. But what actually happened in that gym would shock even the most experienced investigators. Security cameras captured everything. And when I tell you what those cameras recorded, you'll understand why this case made headlines around the world. You'll understand why a jury of 12 adults looked at this footage and some of them couldn't stop crying. Christopher Greger put his 6-year-old son on a treadmill. At first glance, maybe that doesn't sound so terrible. But then he started increasing the speed. Faster and faster. Too fast for a small child to keep up. Corey fell. He got back up. His father made him get back on. The speed increased again. Corey fell again. Harder this time. But still, he was forced to get back on that machine. This happened 6 times. 6 times this little boy fell face first onto that treadmill. 6 times he was forced to get back up and try again. The footage shows Christopher Greger not helping his son, not slowing down the machine, not stopping the torture. At one point, and this detail will haunt me forever, the cameras captured Christopher Greger appearing to bite his own son on the head out of what looked like frustration. Can you imagine the fear? Can you imagine being 6 years old, trying your best, falling over and over again, and instead of comfort and protection from your father, receiving more punishment? The gym employees who saw this were so disturbed that they remembered it clearly. They knew something was wrong. But in that moment, what could they do? How many times do bystanders see something that doesn't feel right but don't know how to intervene? If this story is making you angry, if it's making you want to do something to protect children like Corey, then I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. Because the only way we can prevent these tragedies is by talking about them, by understanding how they happen, and by making sure people know the warning signs. But here's what's even more heartbreaking. That day at the gym wasn't the end of Corey's suffering. It was just the beginning of the most tragic 13 days of his short life. After the treadmill incident on March 20th, Corey Micciolo had 13 more days to live. 13 days where he was in pain. 13 days where the adults around him failed to protect him. 13 days that ended in a tragedy that could have been prevented. What happened during those 13 days? And why didn't anyone save this little boy? Corey went back to his mother's house after that gym visit. Brianna noticed he was hurt. She saw bruises. She was concerned. But remember, she was already fighting an uphill battle in family court. Every time she raised concerns about Christopher Greger, she risked being seen as a problematic ex who was trying to interfere with a father's relationship with his son. This is the impossible situation that protective parents find themselves in every single day across this country. Speak up too much, and you're labeled as difficult. Don't speak up enough, and your child suffers. It's a trap that puts children in danger. Meanwhile, Christopher Greger was acting like nothing had happened. He was making plans. He was going about his daily routine. But something dark was building inside him. Something that would explode on April 2nd, 2021. On April 1st, just one day before Corey died, there was a court hearing about custody. Brianna was trying to protect her son through the legal system. She was fighting for supervised visits only. She was trying to use the proper channels to keep Corey safe. But the court didn't see it her way. Christopher Greger maintained his unsupervised visitation rights. He was allowed to take his son again. Think about that for a moment. While a mother was desperately trying to protect her child through the legal system, the system itself was about to hand that child back to the person who would kill him less than 24 hours later. On April 2nd, 2021, Christopher Greger picked up his son for what would be their final visit together. What happened next is something that investigators had to piece together through evidence, through forensic analysis, through the heartbreaking science of determining how a 6-year-old child died. The medical examiner would later determine that Corey Micciolo died from blunt force trauma. His heart was lacerated. His liver was damaged. These weren't injuries from falling off a treadmill. These were injuries from severe, brutal violence inflicted on a small child's body. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. After inflicting these fatal injuries on his own son, Christopher Greger didn't call 911 immediately. He didn't rush to get help. Instead, he waited. He cleaned up. He made phone calls. He tried to figure out how to explain what had happened. When he finally did take Corey to the hospital, the little boy was already beyond saving. The medical staff fought to save his life, but the injuries were too severe. Corey Micciolo was pronounced dead on April 2nd, 2021. He was 6 years old. Can you imagine the moment when Brianna Micciolo got the call that her son was dead? Can you imagine the guilt she must have felt, wondering if she could have done something more to protect him? Can you imagine the rage, the grief, the absolute devastation of losing your child to violence at the hands of their own father? But the story doesn't end with Corey's death. Because Christopher Greger wasn't done lying. He wasn't done trying to cover up what he had done. And his behavior in the hours and days after his son died would reveal just how cold and calculating he really was. If you're feeling angry right now, if you're thinking about the children in your own life and how desperately we need to do better at protecting them, then please subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Make sure Corey's story is heard. Because the only way we can honor his memory is by making sure other children don't suffer the same fate. After Christopher Greger killed his 6-year-old son, he didn't break down. He didn't confess. He didn't throw himself on the mercy of the hospital staff and beg for forgiveness. Instead, he did something that reveals the true nature of his character. He immediately started trying to cover up what he had done. At the hospital, while medical staff were fighting to save Corey's life, Christopher Greger was spinning a story. He claimed his son had fallen and hit his head. He said it was an accident. He played the role of a concerned, devastated father whose child had been tragically injured. But the medical professionals weren't buying it. The injuries they were seeing didn't match the story they were being told. A simple fall doesn't cause the kind of internal damage that killed Corey Micciolo. These were injuries that spoke of intentional, brutal violence. 2 days after Corey died, Christopher Greger was pulled over by police in Tennessee for speeding in a construction zone. Why was he in Tennessee? He was running. He was trying to get as far away from New Jersey as possible. And when the police officer asked him about his situation, his response was chilling. Instead of expressing grief for his dead son, instead of taking responsibility for what he had done, Christopher Greger blamed Corey's mother. He called her a drug addict. He suggested that if she had been a better mother, Corey would still be alive. Think about that level of narcissism. Think about that level of evil. This man had just brutally killed his own 6-year-old child, and instead of feeling remorse, he was already trying to shift blame to the very woman who had been fighting desperately to protect that child. But investigators weren't fooled. They had the security footage from the gym. They had the medical evidence. They had witness statements from people who had seen Christopher Greger's abusive behavior toward his son. The web of lies was falling apart. When they searched Christopher Greger's phone and computer, they found something that made investigators' blood run cold. Internet searches. Searches about bruises on children. Searches about whether phones could be tracked in airplane mode. Searches that showed he knew exactly what he was doing and was trying to cover his tracks. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This was a calculated pattern of abuse that escalated to murder, followed by a carefully planned cover-up attempt. Meanwhile, Brianna Micciolo was planning her son's funeral. She was trying to process the unimaginable grief of losing her child to violence. She was probably also dealing with the guilt that every protective parent feels when the system fails their child, wondering if there was something more she could have done, some way she could have saved him. The community was horrified. Other parents looked at their own children and wondered how this could happen. How could a father do this to his own son? How could the system fail so completely? If you have children in your life, if you care about child protection, if you want to make sure stories like this are told so we can prevent future tragedies, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Don't wait. Do it now while you're thinking about it, because these stories need to be told and they need to be heard. The investigation into Corey Micciolo's death moved quickly once law enforcement understood what they were dealing with. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was child abuse that escalated to murder. And the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage from the gym was the smoking gun that prosecutors needed. When they showed that video to a grand jury, there was no question that Christopher Greger had abused his son. The footage was so disturbing that even hardened investigators had trouble watching it. But the gym incident wasn't the only evidence. Medical experts examined Corey's body and found a pattern of abuse that went far beyond what happened on that final day. There were old injuries, healed fractures, signs that this little boy had been suffering for much longer than anyone realized. Witnesses came forward with their own stories. People who had seen Christopher Greger's behavior toward his son in public. People who had been uncomfortable with what they witnessed but hadn't known how to intervene. This is one of the most heartbreaking aspects of child abuse cases. How many people see warning signs but don't know what to do with that information? We live in a society where people are afraid to get involved, afraid to report their suspicions, afraid of being wrong. But what if they're right? What if that moment of discomfort you feel when you see a parent interact with their child is actually your instincts telling you that something is wrong? What if your willingness to speak up could save a life? The forensic evidence was damning. The medical examiner determined that Corey had died from blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. His injuries included lacerations to his heart and liver, injuries that required significant force to inflict. These weren't the result of a fall or an accident. This was homicide. Christopher Greger was arrested and charged with murder and child endangerment. But even as the evidence mounted against him, he maintained his innocence. He continued to blame others. He showed no remorse for what he had done to his own son. The case garnered international attention because of the security footage and the particularly cruel nature of the abuse. People around the world saw that video of a 6-year-old boy being forced to run on a treadmill until he collapsed, and they were horrified. Social media exploded with outrage and demands for justice. But attention and outrage aren't enough to bring back a dead child. They aren't enough to undo the trauma that Corey suffered in his final days. They aren't enough to heal the heartbreak of a mother who lost her son to the very person who was supposed to protect him. On May 31st, 2024, after deliberating the evidence, the jury reached their verdict in the case of Christopher Greger. Guilty of aggravated manslaughter. Guilty of child endangerment. The jury didn't convict him of murder in the first degree. They found that while he had killed his son, it wasn't premeditated in the way that murder requires. But they were clear that his actions had caused Corey's death and that he was criminally responsible for what happened. When the verdict was read, there were tears in the courtroom. Finally, more than 3 years after his death, Corey Micciolo had received some measure of justice. But for his mother, Brianna, no verdict could bring back her son. No prison sentence could undo the trauma he suffered. No amount of justice could fill the hole left by a 6-year-old boy who would never grow up, never graduate from school, never have children of his own. On August 2nd, 2024, Christopher Greger appeared in court for sentencing. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison, 20 years for manslaughter and 5 years for child endangerment. 25 years. For taking the life of his own 6-year-old son. For putting that little boy through unimaginable suffering in his final days. For depriving him of every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone that he should have experienced. Some people felt the sentence was too light. Some felt it was appropriate given the charges. But here's what everyone could agree on. No sentence would ever be enough to make up for what was lost when Corey Micciolo died. During the sentencing hearing, Christopher Greger finally spoke. He offered what sounded like an apology, saying he was sorry for the loss of Corey. But even then, his words felt hollow. Even then, he couldn't fully take responsibility for what he had done. Meanwhile, Brianna Micciolo continues to live with the devastating reality of losing her child to violence. She continues to advocate for other children, to share Corey's story, to try to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. The question we're all left with is this. What can we learn from Corey's story? How can we do better at protecting children who are in danger? How can we fix the systems that failed him so completely? If you believe that children like Corey deserve to have their stories told, that we have a responsibility to learn from these tragedies and prevent future ones, then please subscribe to this channel. Make sure these important stories continue to reach the people who need to hear them. Corey Micciolo's story isn't unique. Every year, hundreds of children in America die at the hands of their own parents or caregivers. Every year, protective parents fight desperately through family court systems that are often more concerned with parental rights than child safety. Every year, there are warning signs that get missed, reports that get ignored, and children who pay the ultimate price for adult failures. So what can we learn from Corey's case? How can we do better? First, we need to listen to protective parents. When a mother or father expresses genuine concerns about their child's safety, those concerns need to be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Brianna Micciolo tried to protect her son through the proper channels, but the system failed to hear her in time. Second, we need to train people to recognize the signs of child abuse. The gym employees who witnessed the treadmill incident knew something was wrong, but they didn't know how to intervene effectively. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, family members, we all need to know what to look for and what to do when we see it. Third, we need to reform family court systems to prioritize child safety over parental rights. When there's credible evidence that a child is in danger, that evidence needs to be taken seriously, even if it complicates custody arrangements. Fourth, we need to support organizations that work to prevent child abuse and help survivors. There are groups across the country doing important work to protect children, but they need resources and support to be effective. Most importantly, we need to remember that child protection is everyone's responsibility. It's not just up to parents, teachers, and social workers. It's up to all of us to speak up when we see something that doesn't look right, to support policies that protect children, and to create communities where children are truly safe. Corey Micciolo should be 13 years old today. He should be in middle school, complaining about homework, playing video games, dreaming about his future. Instead, he's buried in a cemetery, his life cut short by the very person who was supposed to protect him. We can't bring Corey back, but we can honor his memory by making sure his story leads to changes that protect other children. We can make sure he didn't die in vain. If you believe that every child deserves to be safe, that stories like Corey's need to be told, and that we all have a role to play in preventing these tragedies, then please subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Make sure these important conversations continue. The story of Corey Micciolo is one that will stay with you long after this video ends. It's a story that challenges us to think differently about child protection, about the warning signs we might be missing, about the systems that are supposed to keep children safe. It's also a story about the love of a mother who tried everything she could to protect her son, about a community that was horrified by what happened in their midst, about the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Most of all, it's a story about a 6-year-old boy who deserved so much better than what he got, who deserved to grow up safe and loved and protected, who deserved to have his childhood filled with joy instead of terror. Christopher Greger is now serving 25 years in prison for what he did to his son. But that sentence doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't bring back a life that was lost far too soon. It doesn't heal the hearts that were broken when Corey died. What it does do is send a message that society will not tolerate the abuse and murder of children, that there are consequences for these actions, that justice, even when it comes late, still matters. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about the children in your own life, if it's inspired you to be more aware of the warning signs of abuse, then Corey's story has served a purpose beyond just seeking justice for what happened to him. Subscribe to this channel if you believe these stories need to be told. Share this video if you think others need to hear Corey's story. And remember, we all have a role to play in protecting the children in our communities. Rest in peace, Corey Micciolo. You deserve so much better than what this world gave you. Your story will not be forgotten.